Welcome back, friends. It's the start of the week, so that means we have some new tournament data to go through. So sit back, relax, and we'll get right to it. Just a quick reminder before we get started, we'll do the old YouTube pleasantries. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps push it out there for more people to see. And if you really liked it, don't forget to subscribe so you get all the latest videos, and it really helps support me and support the channel. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. First thing we're going to take a look at this week is the player numbers. For the previous week, we had 845 players, and for the data slate, we're sitting at just over 8,000. Number of games played was just over 4,400, and for the data slate, we're sitting at just under 42,000. And we had 19 tournaments last week, and bringing the total for the data slate up to 140. All right, and the first chart we're going to look at this week is the win percentage by army for the previous week. Just a quick reminder that Games Workshop's acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%. Anything that falls in that category will be in the green bar. Anything above and below will be yellow, and if it's really above or below, it'll be red. Taking a look at the top here, we have Aeldari at 57%, and then we have Genestealer Cults and Demons, both at 56%. Knights at 52, and Custodes at 52, rounding out the top 5. Down at the bottom, we have Dark Angels, Sisters of Battle, and Thousand Sons at 37%. We have Imperial Agents at 40, and Adeptus Mechanicus at 41%, rounding out the bottom 4. And we're going to take a quick look at some of the interesting and more standout factions here. So Genestealer Cults had a bounce back week. Last week they're down in the 40%. So they've been kind of up and down, high 50s to down in the low 40s. So this week they had a good week at 56%. Black Templar had a really good week after struggling for a long time. Not sure what happened there, but they're at 49% win rate for the week. It's nice to see some success, even if it's at the end of the data slate with the new changes coming soon. Hopefully some positive changes for them and they can stay in that category. Aeldari players might be starting to figure out the new codex. They got a 57% win rate this week, which is the highest we've seen in a while for a single week outside of Imperial Agents, who usually have such a low player count that 1 or 2 players can skew that in a really high percentage. But they did show a lot of success this week. So hopefully with the new data slate coming, the changes won't be too drastic, and it'll give them a little time to sort of get into the groove and figure out where they actually lie before they make any changes to the army. Dark Angels decided to take a trip down to the bottom this week and join Sisters of Battle and Thousand Sons at 37% win rate, which is very poor. Not surprising to see Sisters down there, and Thousand Sons has been struggling a lot lately too, so hopefully the data slate will bring them some love along with Sisters. In the comments, this channel is kind of becoming the Sisters support group, I think. We've got a lot of discouraged players and new and old coming in and voicing their frustration for the army, so we don't see any positive changes coming in the next data slate here. I think there's going to be a riot on our hands. A couple other quick things to note. Demons had a good week of 56%. They're up pretty high. Deathwatch down at 42%. They had a low week. They have been maintaining a pretty high win rate, actually, overall. They had the highest average for the entire data slate, so it's surprising to see them down so low this week. And then we had, everyone in the middle looking good. You had Orcs, Death Guard, Blood Angels, everyone in that middle section doing just where they should. All right, and we're going to look at the army representation, which is a percentage of the player base. So if every army was equal, they would all have 3.7%. Looking at the chart, you can see that the Aeldari hype train is kind of real. They're running away with the representation here at over 10%, which is extremely high, one of the highest we've seen in a long time. And then you have the rest of the usual suspects at the top. Space Marines at 6.5, Ashmel Tarm at 6.5, Necrons at 6.3, and Chaos Space Marines at 5.9. And then down at the bottom, you have Agents at 0.4, which is par for the course for them. Drukhari at 1.2, second lowest. Sisters at 1.4. Mechanicus and Votan both at 1.5, rounding out the bottom 5. So looking at this chart, it's kind of indicative of how this whole data slate has gone. And as it's kind of winding down, it kind of puts the nail to the coffin here that the armies who are doing good are getting all the players. Aeldari was, mid-pack, and then all of a sudden, hey, new codex, it's looking pretty good. Boom, over 10% players. Even Space Marines never got that high. During the heyday in the middle of this data slate there when they were winning all the tournaments, they were only usually 8 or 9%. So if you make a good codex and you give them good rules and you make them fun to play, people will play them. Now, you're never going to see Imperial Agents up at 10%, no matter how good they are, just by the nature of the army, but you will see Sisters and Drukhari and Mechanicus and Votan sitting up right around the average where they should be, or a little bit higher. They have been up there when they're doing good. I mean, Sisters was up over 4 or 5% sometimes when they were in the middle of their most power there, right after the codex drop. So I think this kind of shows which armies had the most success during this data slate. The ones that got the most love, maybe had the best Grotmas detachments or usable Grotmas detachments in most cases, not all. But there's very few armies at the top, or any armies at the top, that are struggling win rate wise. So it's a direct correlation of the better the army is doing, the more people are going to play them. Hopefully GW can look at these results and look at their own numbers and say, okay, these are the armies that need some love. Really give armies at the bottom the attention they deserve. So this chart shows all the statistics put together. We have win rate, we have XOX1 percentage, and representation. So just a reminder, XOX1 is percentage of times that within a given army that a player had 0 losses or only 1 loss at a tournament. So 5-0 or 4-1. The higher the percentage, the better that army it does getting to the top table. So generally more powerful the army is as a whole. So looking at this chart at the top here, I've organized it so the armies with the highest combined stats are at the top and the lowest at the bottom. So Aeldari came in first here. They had the highest win percentage. They had the second highest XOX1 and the highest rep, so not surprising they're up there. Demons number 2, 56% win rate, 31% XOX1, so almost 1/3 of all Demons players went undefeated or only 1 loss at a tournament. So that shows a lot of Demon players are having a lot of success. So, they show up to armies. There's very few struggling at the bottom table. So it's definitely a powerful army right now. And that's mostly being led by Legion of Excess. And I suspect that will get hit with the nerf bat here soon. Next up, we had a little surprise at Gene Stealer cults this week. A really good win rate, really good XOX1 at 27, and a good rep at 3.1. And then we had Necrons and Chaos Space Marines rounding out the rest of the top 5. Down the bottom, Thousand Suns, not surprising, 37% win rate, but they had 0% XOX1. Same as Agents and same as Adeptus Mechanicus. So there's 3 armies down at the very bottom who struggled mightily to get any success this week. No player for all 3 of those armies basically sniffed anywhere near the top tables. And then we also have Dark Angels with 37%, but they had 7% XOX1, so they had a couple people do okay. And then Deathwatch rounding out the bottom 5. Sisters did have a really poor win rate, but they had a really high XOX1. So there's a couple players who did really well, and everyone else pretty much struggled. So you're looking at like 1 or 2 players going 5-0 or 4-1, and then everyone else pretty much going 1-4 to drag that win rate down to 37%. And then any other standouts here that we can look at, most of the armies in the middle are, right within that average. The average XOX1 is usually around 13%, so anything within 4 or 5% is pretty average. The only thing that really stands out is Orcs. They had 48% win rate, and they also had a 21% XOX1 with a 4.5% rep. So the win rate wasn't as high, slightly below. The win rate wasn't as high, just right about average, but they had a really good XOX1. So they had quite a few players doing really well. And down at the bottom, Grey Knights, they kind of had a low-key bad week, and they've been having a lot of bad weeks. 43% win rate, down right near the bottom, 5% XOX1, and 2.5% rep. So they had lots of players, 2.5 rep. It's not the average, but it's pretty high up. And they only had 5% of those players have any success at a tournament. So but they definitely struggled last week. Okay, and we're going to move on to the tournament wins for each army last week. So we can see at the top here, Chaos Demons had 4, surprisingly. Tau had 2, even though they were just kind of mid all last week. And they had a couple players there who did really well, and a bunch of people who did average to poor. And they also had, pulling it up at the last moment, Black Templars got their first army win of the Dataslate, so better late than never. Some of the other ones to mention, we had Lees of Votan got a tournament win, Gene Stealers got 2 tournament wins, Deathwatch got another one, and Imperial Knights got 1 more. So we had a nice variety of tournament winners this week, with just Demons sort of running the show with excess, but I think this was the sort of last hurrah before they get knocked down a few pegs. The next chart we're going to look at is the tournament wins for each subfaction. So this just kind of breaks down how each subfaction did instead of just looking at the armies. So as I mentioned, Legion of Excess, they got 2 wins. They also got wins from Scintillating Legion and Plague Legion. Black Templars pulled it out with Righteous Crusader, and Tau actually pulled out a tournament win with the Crude Hunting Pack. I didn't expect to see them get a win at all, actually, but they pulled it out. So someone found some success there with that detachment. So that's nice to see. And now we're going to look at the data slate as a whole. So this is 11 weeks worth of data, and this is the win percentage for all armies. So just at the end there, Demons actually pulled out number 1 spot. They overthrew Deathwatch, bringing their average up to almost 54%, and Deathwatch down to 53. Deathwatch had a rough week, and it kind of dropped them a little bit at the end there. They've been in first place for a while. Necrons at 51, Imperial Knights at 51, and the Custodes at just under 51%, rounds out the top 5. The bottom 5, we have Black Templars at 41%, Sisters at 42, Mechanicus at just under 43, Chaos Knights at 45, and World Eaters at just over 45.5. So Dark Angels have been kind of creeping towards the bottom lately. I don't know what exactly caused that decline. They were never at the top, but they were kind of mid, and now they're kind of slowly creeping towards the bottom. They're dangerously close to falling below 45%. And it looks like, for the final week before the data slate is rumored to come out, everything is pretty balanced. I mean, this chart is mostly green, and the highest win percentage is 54%. So the average is right around 49% because you have to include people who have draws in there. Demons is only 5% over. That's one of the more balanced data slates I've seen in the last year. We've had some armies with 56, 57, 58% at the end of a data slate, so it's looking pretty good. I mean, there's a few armies at the bottom who are obviously struggling, but I think they'll be addressed with the Dataslate releases. All right, and we're going to look at the army representation for the Dataslate. So just a reminder, average is 3.7. So at the top, we had Space Marines at 7.8%, Necrons at 6.5%, Astra Militarum at 5.9%, Aeldari at 5.8%, and Custodes at 5.6%. Down at the bottom, Imperial Agents at 0.3%, Deathwatch and Sisters at 1.4%, Black Templars at 1.6%, and Drukhari at 1.7%. And not surprising, Space Marines and Necrons were the most popular armies this Dataslate. Necrons started out really strong with the Grotmas detachment. Star Shatter, they had a ton of players before that got nerfed. And Space Marines also, with all the changes that happened last Dataslate, they were extremely popular with the Oath of Moment changes. Militarum, Brigade kind of ran the show for them for the most part. And Aeldari is just creeping up there the last couple of weeks, breaking into the top 5 thanks to a new codex. And Custodes has actually been a very popular but very average. Their Grotmas detachment gave them some more playability with some different units, and they buffed the bikes. They weren't overpowered, they weren't running away with anything, but they were just performing consistently good, which is kind of where you want to see. And then down at the bottom, we have all the familiar faces. I mean, you're always kind of agents at the bottom, but Deathwatch, not surprisingly, only 1 detachment. Sisters, Black Templars, and Drukhari, they're always at the bottom. This is an area where I think the most improvement can be made overall. Where the win percentage is very average, the representation is very skewed towards the high. Low is very low and the highs are very high. So there's a lot of players playing a select few of armies, and I think this is a good spot or a good area that Games Workshop can look at these numbers and say, why are we not seeing people play these armies? And their conclusion will be, we should probably make another Space Marine Lieutenant. But hopefully they'll address some of the actual issues. Get Drukhari some better rules, get them some new models when their codex finally releases. Thousand Suns, really revamp Magic. They need some love there. Space Wolves need that identity back. They're kind of just meh right now. I mean, Sisters, you gutted their Miracle Dice, you gutted their army rule, and when you take away such a powerful army rule and the rest of the army is balanced around that rule and you sort of take that away, then you're just left with subpower units and subpower rules and data sheets. So hopefully they can fix the errors they made, bring them back up to where they need to be, right around the average. The next chart we're going to look at here is the all 3 stats combined, but this is for the Dataslate. So we have win percentage, XOX1, and representation. So as you can see at the top, Demons kind of dominated this Dataslate, unsurprisingly, due to Legion of Excess. They had really the best win rate. They had one of the highest XOX1 and a way above average representation. Agents, their numbers, they're actually pretty high up on the chart, but that's mostly due to a kind of inflated XOX1 due to the low number of players. If you only have a couple that have success, it's going to really spike that number up there. Aeldari and Necrons are both next, and they're pretty much neck and neck. They kind of got there a little bit different ways. They are pretty much right there, tied. And then you have Imperial Knights right underneath them. Their sort of downfall for Imperial Knights is their representation is almost half of the other ones. And then down at the bottom, you have Black Templars at the bottom. They had only one of the 2 armies that had an under 10% XOX1 percentage for the whole Dataslate. Then you have Sisters of Battle, Adeptus Mechanicus, World Eaters, and Chaos Knights. World Eaters actually had the lowest XOX1 percentage for the whole Dataslate, sitting at just under 9%, which is kind of surprising because they did have an above average representation. So this is an army that barely won above average of just almost 46%, but they just had no success. They were just kind of like middling in the mid boards, not really doing too much. I think they won a couple tournaments here and there, but overall the army's kind of lifeless right now, and they definitely need some help as well. So some of the things that stick out here is Space Wolves. They have an average win percentage, 47%. It's just below average. XOX1's only just above 10%. So again, they just sit in the mid boards, 3-2, 2-3 for most tournaments, not really going too far or doing too much. And then you have stuff at the top like Aeldari at 20%, XOX1, Necrons and Knights at 17%. So these armies are on average doing a lot better. So you can definitely see the armies that you expect to be at the bottom are at the bottom. There's really not too many surprises here and there, but it's just interesting to see how when you combine all the stats, everything sort of lines up. And now we're going to look at army tournament wins by week. So this is for the whole Dataslate. This is the number of tournament wins total, and each week is broken down into a different color. So you can kind of see where the army gets all their wins from. So Demons, they pull it out late and they take the top spot from the Space Marines, who've been leading the entire Dataslate, but they got 4 wins this week, and it puts them into number 1 with 17. Space Marines at number 2 with 15. Chaos Space Marines with number 3 with 12. And then you have Aeldari and Necrons with 11 and 9. And Astra Militarum tied with Necrons with 9. Down at the bottom there, we see Black Templars finally got their first win. Drukhari also has 1 win. Grey Knights has 1 win, and Agents also have 1 win. And then everyone else is sitting in mostly that 3 to 5 range, which ideally you'd want everyone to be kind of that 3 to 5 range, more so the 5. If you could share some of those top wins with the bottom, everything would be a little bit more balanced. But it's definitely a top-heavy data slate for tournament wins. We're only seeing 5 or 6 armies doing most of the heavy lifting. You know, Admech and Sisters, they didn't get a tournament win all data slate. Sisters were hoping for a miracle, but there's no dice there. Admech is same thing, just in a rough spot. They just don't have the firepower or the stopping power to pull it a win. Okay, and we're going to move on to our faction focus. For the first one we're going to look at is Adeptus Custodes. So I mentioned earlier that they had a very average data slate. So looking at the win percentages and army reps week over week, you can see their army rep is actually well above average, mostly over 5%, which is, you know, really good. They get a lot of players, but their win percentage is mostly around 47 to 52%, with a few weeks here and there at like 59, or 1 week, sorry, at 59. But overall, really good win percentage. It's right where you want to be. So taking a look at the subfactions here, you can see the Solar Spearhead was doing most of the heavy lifting at 42% of the player base, and then you had Shield Host at 37% of the player base. Talons the Emperor had 20, and the Auric Champions had like 2 or 3%. And then you look at the win percentages, Solar Spearhead was sort of also taking the charge there with 53% win rate. You had Talons at 51, Shield Host at 47, and then you had Auric Champions at 20%. Overall, everything is fairly balanced. We had most of the players playing 2 detachments, but it wasn't super lopsided. And you had the win percentages all within 47 to 51%. So, I mean, overall, everything's looking really good. And if they can stay in this range, I think it's really good for the Custodes players. They're not dominating, but they're not getting run over. Everything's right where you need to be. You look at the average stats versus the meta average. Win percentage, 51 versus 48%, slightly above average. Army rep, 5.6 to 3.7, above average, just a little bit. XOX1, pretty much bang on average. Tournament wins, almost bang on average. So overall, this army is in a really good spot right now, and hopefully with the changes coming, they will stay there. And the next faction focus we're going to look at is the Tyranids. Tyranids maintained a very good win rate and a very good army rep over this thing. Much like the Custodes, their army rep was averaging over 5%, and their win rate was just under 50%. And week over week, they're anywhere from 46 to 55%, with a couple small outliers here and there. So overall, very good, very average. They're in a pretty healthy spot. Look at the subfactions. Invasion Fleet doing most of the work for them, 52%. And so you had Crusher Stampede at 15, and Vanguard Onslaught at 16, and everything else kind of coming in under 10%. And then the win rates, again, Simulation Swarm, actually, despite their only 8% representation, they did have a 60% win rate, so there was some good play there. But everyone else was right around 50%, except for Synaptic Nexus, but they only had 5% of the players, so a very small amount. Grotmas was kind of a bust for the Tyranids. The Warrior Bioform, only 3.5% of the players. They had a 49% win rate, but clearly people weren't too excited to play them with only 3.5% of players playing them. It's the opposite of Custodes, who had like 40% of people playing their detachment. But overall, looking at everything, their ranks out of 27, they're actually above average on everything. But that's due to the skewing kind of how everything is working. You have so many armies doing very poorly at the bottom. Even if you are top 10, it's not that much of a difference versus the overall average, because you have so many armies clumped into that middle range. So you take a look at the meta health rating. The average meta health rating is 100. So that means if every army was doing perfectly average across the board in every category, they would all have a 100 rating. So if you're above 100, you're doing slightly better than the average. And if you're below, then you're doing slightly below. So they're at 110. So they're doing like 10% better than the average across the board. So that's really not that much. So they're in a really good spot. And I'm sure there's some things that can be adjusted here and there between each subfaction and in specific data sheets, up or down, depending on what's doing good, what's not. But overall, I think Tyranids had a really good data slate, and hopefully they can continue it going forward. All right, guys, that's it. Thanks for watching. I just want to make a quick note. I did create a Patreon. If you'd like to help support me and support the channel, you can go over there and sign up on Patreon. I'd really appreciate you guys' support. All right, guys, that's it for this week. Have a good week. Good luck in the tournaments this weekend coming, and we'll see you next week.